Go ahead and open your Bibles tonight to the book of Matthew, chapter 27. We are going to pick up here in verse 62, where we left off this morning. If you will, as you get settled in, I want you to do a quick scan with me over the last few verses. Matthew has been emphasizing seeing and watching. And notice back there at Matthew 27, going back to about verse 36, he said there, and sitting down they watched him there. That was when he was on the cross. Notice, drop down to verse 49. The rest said, let us see whether Elijah or Elias will come to save him. And that's when Jesus was crying out, Eli, Eli, and they thought he was hollering for Elijah. Verse 54, now when the centurion and they that were with him watching Jesus saw the earthquake. We looked at that this morning. They were watching Jesus and they were moved by the things that they were seeing. They saw the earthquake. Notice in verse 55, and many women were there beholding. And that means they were looking, they were seeing what was happening afar off. And notice also in verse 61, the words see and watch are not explicitly stated, but look at what it says. And there was Mary Magdalene and the other Mary sitting over against the sepulchre. They were watching the tomb. And so I think that Matthew wants you to see that they were watching Jesus, and we are to see things and realize things about what was happening to Jesus. And there are mixed responses to Jesus. Some are watching and they're not seeing. Some are watching and they're seeing actually what is happening to Jesus. And I want to pick up where we left off this morning. We were talking about discipleship there at the end of that message. And I want you to know that as these women were watching, they were being faithful and they were serving. You are not going to properly serve God if you are not watching God. If you are not seeing what God is doing, if you are not aware and realizing who Jesus is and what God is doing in your life, how can you serve Him? Well, I guess you can call it service, but you're really serving yourself. You know, unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that they are serving. They call it service. They claim to be serving, but they're not doing anything of the sort. They're serving themselves. They're actually doing what they want to do. They're not really serving Jesus. Well, the concepts of seeing and watching are going to extend all the way through the resurrection narrative, all the way through into chapter 28, and we'll see that in the next few messages. In our previous text this morning, we saw that Jesus' death, it brought extraordinary witness, didn't it? God was speaking. God was witnessing to these things. And also those who were present at the cross witnessed to these things. The centurion said, truly this was the Son of God. And then also those women, or Joseph of Arimathea, who went to the tomb, and then the women who went with him. He was witnessing. We saw his faith and the women's faith on display, demonstrated in going to the tomb. And so Jesus' death, it brought extraordinary witness. And it also, the implications of his death is that it ushered a new access to God. It opened up, that curtain was opened up, and now we have access to God that we didn't have before. We can go through Jesus to God. And so tonight, though, I want you to see this. There's a contrast taking place. It seems like the day, it was kind of daytime, right? It was a new day. It seemed like there was a bit of fresh air in the last text in 51 through 61. We saw these demonstrations of faith, and we saw all these amazing things and wonderful things that God was doing. And we're thinking, now the death of Jesus is bringing triumph over his enemies, and they are done. They are defeated. And in a sense, they are done and they're defeated. In another sense, Matthew reminds us in verses 62 through 66, they're not done. I want to go ahead and make it just an easy application. There's going to be enemies of God that you're going to face in your life. They're not done. They're going to harass you. They're going to attack Jesus. They're going to cause problems in your life. They're going to present challenges in your ministry. They are not done. But in another sense, they are defeated. They are still allowed to interact. They are still allowed to coexist. You remember what Jesus said to his disciples? He was talking about the wheat and the tares. His disciples said, do you want us to go tear the tares out and weed the garden? And Jesus says, no, let them both grow up together. I want to remind you of this. There is a contrast between his enemies and what they are doing and what they have desire and their goal is, but then between his faithful followers who are doing something else. The people of God and the enemies of God, they don't do the same thing. They are a contrast. One is going to try to thwart the will of God and stop the will of God, and then the people of God are going in the name of God and they're serving faithfully, and that's what you see here tonight. The first thing I want you to see in verses 62 through 66 is the desire to keep the tomb sealed. I'm going to go ahead and say it right now. In a couple of passages ago, when Jesus was on the cross, they were saying, if you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. That's exactly what his enemies wanted him to do. They wanted him to come down off of that cross. And if you believe for 1 second that they would have believed in him if he would have come down from the cross, then I got news for you. That wouldn't have convinced them either. You know, in Luke, you saw in the story there of the rich man and Lazarus, you know that in chapter, I believe it's in chapter 16, is in this story of the rich man and Lazarus, is that when the rich man is in hell, he says, send someone to warn my family so that they will believe. They wouldn't have believed anyway. There's already been someone sent to their family. There's already been miracles worked before these people, and they didn't believe them. The Word of God is speaking, and they're not believing. And so here you see in verse 62 through 66, what their goal is to keep the tomb sealed. Notice here in 62 and 63, I'm going to read the verses. Now the next day that followed, the day of the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that deceiver said, while he was yet alive, after 3 days I will rise again. Well, a couple of things here that jumps out to us is it's Saturday. It is the Sabbath. And so on the next day, the day after Friday, the Pharisees and the chief priests, it says there in verse 62, that's the group of people. You have Sadducees and the Pharisees. They are opponents, they are enemies, but they have a common enemy. I've seen that before. It's kind of confusing when you have two people that don't get along. Many times they will form an alliance because they have a common enemy. And their common enemy is Jesus. And so they begin to worry about this thing of Jesus, and they have heard about his predictions of rising again on the third day. And they're beginning to have fear, and they're thinking, this is going to be terrible if we're wrong and his body is stolen. Dear friend, don't think that they're starting to wonder if they're wrong. They do not wonder if they're wrong. They believe that they're right. They believe what they believe. And they will believe what they believe all the way to hell. I have talked to people, and you have talked to people about their beliefs, and you just talk to them and you hear people say, well, you know, that's what they believe. That's what they believe, and they're still wrong. And here's what they believe is that Jesus will not be raised from the dead, but that his tomb will be robbed. And so this is Saturday, and they get together with Pilate. And by the way, in verse 63, it's not sir, it's Lord. It's not sir, it's Kyrie. It's the term that was always referred to Jesus in the book of Matthew until now. And here is what they come. They come to Pilate and they call Pilate Lord. And they come to him. They don't believe that Jesus is Lord. They come to Pilate and they begin to flatter him and they begin to give him reverence and they even call him Lord. And they say, Lord, we remember that deceiver said, don't think they're starting to believe in Jesus. They just called him a deceiver. And he said, Jesus said, I will rise again after 3 days. Well, what are they talking about? Well, if we read on, I think that there's a clue in this. Look at verse 64. In verse 64 and 65, here is the next little movement in the text. I'm going to read both verses. Command therefore, and this is what he is saying. This is what the Pharisees and the Sadducees are saying to Pilate. We want you to command, therefore, that the sepulchre, the tomb, be made sure. It is sealed. It is tight. It is impossible to be opened until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say unto the people, He is risen from the dead. So the last error shall be worse than the first. Pilate said unto them, You have a watch. Go your way. Make it as sure as you can. Request granted. They come and they ask Pilate, Pilate, if you will just issue this command. I know that if you will do this, it will be with Roman soldiers and it will be impossible for his body to be stolen. Let me tell you it's one of the most far-fetched things to think that the cowardly disciples are all of a sudden going to grow a backbone and show up and steal a body when they wouldn't even follow him to the cross. They're not going to go and steal a body. They don't have a backbone right now. They've done run off and deserted Jesus. The only people that are there is the Apostle John and about 4 or 5 women, at least 4 or 5 women, maybe a few others. Are the women going to be able to roll the stone away and steal his body? Would they even have had enough time for it to register, we've got to steal his body? I don't think so. All of this has happened suddenly. And so you have this time element. Just a few days ago, they were sitting at Jesus' feet and they were listening to him and they were in unbelief. What are you talking about, Jesus, that you're going to die? They were not prepared for all of this to happen. Do you think that they really could have thrown a plan together and stolen this body? I think not. But the Pharisees and the Sadducees are worried about this. And they've been worried about Jesus. They've been worried that his ministry and his preaching was going to take people and make them believe that he was the Messiah. That's the first deception that they were afraid of. The second deception that they're afraid of is that his body will be taken and people will start to believe that he has been resurrected. I'm going to tell you, these people want the same thing that Satan wants, is they want people to stay in unbelief. I'm not even going to call these good. These are not good people. These are awful people, and they are on the side of darkness. I started to say a while ago, and I kind of lost my train of thought, or I just jumped tracks on us. It seemed like that there was a light of day here earlier, right, in 51 through 61. That there was hope. That God shook the earth and He's going to triumph for His enemies. And now we see the darkness start to move back over, don't we? We see these people who have dark motives and sinful motives, and the wickedness begins to go to work again. Here we go again. Now watch this. They'll say unto the people, He is risen from the dead. So the last error shall be worse than the first. You know, that's an interesting phrase there because it's what Jesus said in chapter 12, verse 45. Go back there with me because I want to show you a couple of things about this. Back in chapter 12, I was reviewing this over the last week, and there was a little pericope 38 through 45, or 38, actually it was 38 through 50, that we took a look at. It was about a year ago when we took a look. I was looking at my notes, and I saw the date. I think it was in October of last year. And the question began at the beginning of that pericope is that we would like to see a sign from you. And Jesus said, look what He says. He says, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. Dear friend, there's still an evil and adulterous generation. Notice what He says there in what Jesus says in verse 45. After He talked about an unclean spirit is gone out of a man in verse 43. And then He says, then goeth he and taketh with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there, and the last state of that man is worse than the first. Almost the same expression as what they are using over here to talk about the deception of Jesus, that He is the Messiah, and the deception that He may be resurrected. Dear friend, the context back here in chapter 12 was controversy between Jesus and the Pharisees, and Jesus had a hand of mercy out, and He was saying, you need to believe. You need to quit seeking after a sign. Interesting there in that text is that He says that there will be no sign given except for the sign of Jonah. You remember that? Just as Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a whale, so will the Son of Man spend 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. They remember that. Oh, it's so sad when people have heard the gospel. They have heard the story about Jesus, yet they remain obstinate in their unbelief. And I don't know if that expression, the last state will be worse, or the last state will be worse than the first, was a common expression of the day, or if they remembered, maybe even unconsciously remembered, that Jesus had said that to them. And know that now they are using it in a similar manner, and they are still in unbelief. Well, notice in verse 66, the third little movement of this opening part is that He grants them permission, and they went and they made the sepulchre sure. It is tight. It is impenetrable. And it says there, sealing the stone. It's the same word, that's word seal, that's used in their literature of the time of when the royal seal would be on a document. You may not be aware of this, but sometimes they would have a paper document, and they would roll it up, and they would tie a ribbon around it, and they would put a wax seal on it. And the wax, when it was wet, they would put the imprint of the king's stamp on that wax, and it would denote that this is an authentic message from the king. And here He is saying something similar. Around the crack of that sepulcher, of that tomb, of that stone that's in front of the tomb, they would probably use clay or some kind of wax to fill in that crack. And as long as that crack or that seal is not broken, then we can be assured that no one has entered into this tomb. And so they are doing everything they can to put security measures in place to seal the tomb. Make sure that no one will enter. You're going to hear the story here on Wednesday of what really happens. But here they make these efforts to seal the stone. And look at this, they set a watch. They have soldiers in front of the stone, and so they are doing everything they can. What more can we do? We've got soldiers, we've got manpower here, we've got a seal that will denote whether or not it's been opened. It is secure, it is set, it is as tight as possible. Every human effort has been made to ensure that Jesus stays in the tomb. To be continued. Notice the second thing I want you to see tonight is the women at the tomb. I could have said the women go to the tomb. But notice in verse 1 of chapter 28, I love this. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. Matthew gives us two names of women. There's actually more than this. And in Luke chapter 24 and verse 10, I believe there are four names given. And so there's more than just these two. But in Mark 16, we learn more about the purpose for their going. I'm going to sum it up very, very easily and simply. They're going because they are being faithful to God. They're going because they love Jesus. They're going and they're doing something because of their Lord. I am confounded at the laziness. I am confounded at the apathy and the complacency of people that call themselves God's people and they do nothing. They will not go. They will not get up. They will not move. But you see people here moving for the cause of Christ when it is not popular. He is dead. Folk, He is alive now. I don't know what our excuse is now. Now we have a reason to go because He lives. Here He is dead and they are going. But I'm going to tell you the difference is that they love Jesus. And they go. I talked about discipleship this morning. I'm going to tell you what true discipleship is. It ain't a class you take. And that's great. Have a discipleship class. I want to teach it. It'll be awesome. It'll be great. We need it. But that's not what discipleship is. Discipleship is not a class. Let me tell you what discipleship is. Discipleship is following without accountability. You know, there's a lot of people that they need babied. I need an accountability partner. Well, you know, you might have a serious struggle that you have, and you do need support. Let me tell you what you have is you have a church family. But let me tell you what true, genuine discipleship is. It's called faithfulness. It's called following without accountability, but really in the New Testament, what it is going without being told. It is going and you go willfully. No one makes you do it. You know, when I was little, my parents made me go to church. And there came a time in my life where I had to decide, am I going to go to church? At one time, I was carried to church. But then there came a time in my life where I had to decide, am I going to carry myself to church? What is this to me? There's a lot of people that came to that point in their life and they said, no, I'm not going to go. If you're going to follow Jesus, dear friend, you're going to go. We're going to get to that next Sunday morning at the Great Commission. He's going to say to them, go. Be going into the whole world. The second thing I want you to see as far as application in this is all of these efforts of His enemies. They are futile. They have set a watch to watch the tomb. They have taunted Him and mocked Him while He was on the cross. Come down from the cross. They have called Him a deceiver. They have run Him down. They have tried to keep the tomb sealed and shut and impossible for Jesus to come out of the tomb. But all of their efforts are going to be futile because the power of God is going to overrule them. I want to remind you of something, and I know you know this. but God is all powerful. We don't stand a chance. When you get in God's way, you're not going to make it. I want to remind you, I found a great verse that I want to read from 2 Chronicles. And the author of 2 Chronicles wrote this about God. Listen to this. It's 2 Chronicles 20 and verse 6, I believe. O Lord, God of our fathers, are you not God in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. In your hand are power and might, so that none is able to withstand you. All of what the Pharisees wanted to do and the Sadducees wanted to do, it was a futile effort in the face of God. God is all powerful. God is in complete control of all of these events concerning His Son. I'm going to ask our musicians to come. We're going to have a song of invitation. And I want to invite you to come tonight, whatever may be your need. It might be that you need to renew your walk with Him. It may be for baptism. It may be for salvation. I don't know what may be on your heart, what your need is. As we stand, let's have a song of invitation.